Greetings, Viceroys. It's been a long time since my first tier list video, and this is the long-awaited update to our tier lists. And we have three of them: Building Tier List, Epic Cornerstones, and Legendary Cornerstones. We're going to start with Epic Cornerstones, then move into Legendary, and then discuss the buildings last, in reverse order from my original tier list publication. And as a reminder, the Cornerstone rubric is up here on the screen, so you can take a look at that. I'm not going to go through it too much. Why have ratings changed? There's three broad strokes for why something may be rated differently in this video compared to the original rating. The first one, of course, is obvious. Devs have been making changes to the game. They've been balance changes, updates, any number of things. So if something has been updated directly, we will discuss it and why it's better or worse now, or maybe perhaps the same in at least one case. Then, as we play the game, our understanding grows. We've developed new strategies. We've become better. So we're going to analyze the cornerstones and the buildings in that new light of our new strategies, and some things are going to shift either up or down very slightly based on what we now know. And there's actually one very big mover in the legendary cornerstone list, which I think is a direct result of us discovering new strategies, and that should maybe come as no surprise to some of you. And the final reason is we've been playing on Queen's Hand P20, and I think that's the true litmus test for how good a cornerstone or building is how does it stack up on Queen's Hand P20. If you're just starting a new city playing Queen's Hand, how good is that building or cornerstone? That's the true litmus test for the value that something provides, is how does it do on the hardest difficulty. So those are the reasons why something may shift around. If you've seen my previous videos, don't be too alarmed. The general strategy we discussed is still the same. Most things are not changing that much. The opinions we gave last time are more or less the same, but there are a few notable movers, and we'll spend more time talking about those, of course. All right, here we have our epic tier list, and you can see, take a look, most things are unchanged. Most things are approximately where we left them. You can see in a general sense. You'll notice that the D tier is a bit more trim, and the C tier actually expanded a little bit. There were quite a few movements from the D tier to the C tier. And let's start with the D tier and move our way up. We have two trading related cornerstones to start here: trade logs and stormwalker trainings. Both of these are being demoted from the C tier to the D tier. Trade logs gain one additional trade route. 2 trade routes on Queen's Hand mode is generally sufficient. You don't really need a third one. Traders arrive 25% quicker is a good benefit, but ultimately not that necessary. Trade logs, you're going to decline this for Amber pretty much every single time, and it's the same deal with Stormwalker training. Trade routes are 40% faster. This is even worse. Stormwalker training is one of the worst cornerstones of all time. Essentially, you're always going to decline this one for 10 Amber, except in extremely niche situations, which I have a hard time imagining. So Stormwalker training, just very bad. Don't draft this one. Both of these are getting demoted from C to D. All right, let's go to the C tier then. And you can see there's a lot of familiar faces here in the C tier. But first off, we have Surprise Child, and I'm going to reveal this one at the same time. Lost in the Wilds. Surprise Child, Lost in the Wilds. Both of these are population control cornerstones. Population control cornerstones, I used to rate all of these in the D tier, and why am I moving them up to C tier? Gain 1 lizard every 25 eggs produced. This is good if you start with only 6 people in your city, if you really need some early population gain, because 6 workers is like a perilously low amount. This could help you if you get it on year 1, and it's kind of the same deal with Lost in the Wilds. Lost in the Wilds, gain 1 villager every time you discover a new glade. This is okay if you really need the extra people right off the bat. And we did have a game where this helped us. Lost in the Wilds helped us. And while we're in here, let's take a look at Secure Trail as well. Royal Stormwalkers, yeah, newcomers will arrive 25% quicker. This is, again, a population control cornerstone. I like this one a little bit more than Lost in the Wilds and Surprise Child, because this one, it doesn't inflate your population. Remember, every time newcomers arrive, you gain resources that come with them. So Secure Trail, I think, is generally better than Surprise Child for that reason. And also Lost in the Wilds, same story. So Secure Trail, this is going to be a C tier cornerstone. We'll reveal its position in just a moment. But next up, we have Blood Price Contract. On Queen's Hand mode, you simply cannot afford to be losing villagers. Gain 10 Amber every time a villager dies. It's just not viable. This thing does combo with Hidden from the Queen and some other cornerstones, but simply you're not going to do that most of the time. Blood Price Contract, we originally had this one as B, but it's getting demoted to C, and good riddance, honestly. It did not belong in B. Travel rations. Okay, we need to discuss haulers for a brief moment, because haulers were a new addition since my last video, even though they've been in the game for quite a while now. And haulers, what they do is you can assign up to 3 haulers to the main warehouse and 2 haulers to each satellite warehouse, and they just move stuff around. They don't actually build things or craft things. They just move resources around as needed, and it's hard to control them. They just kind of act randomly, doing whatever they think is best. it is useful. It is like having another worker. It's not like this is useless, but it is difficult to control them. So haulers are limited use and something you only want to do if you have more workers than you have jobs. But travel rations, what does this do? Increases the time between breaks for haulers by 50%, which, okay, that stat is actually quite good. Gain 50% break time, or, time between breaks. That means that they're going to be consuming less food. They're going to spend more time working and less time going on break. This is a really excellent stat. Unfortunately, travel rations only applies it to your haulers, which are going to be, 10 to 20% of your workforce? Maybe? I mean, 20% is pushing it. You really shouldn't have 20% haulers in your workforce. So travel rations is not applying this benefit to a huge amount of your workforce. What you can do is micromanage your haulers and assign them in and out of the position so that when a worker is like 2 seconds away from going on break, you put them as a hauler and now they actually have a minute and 2 seconds before they go on break, which is really darn good. If you're willing to micro and you have the awareness to do this correctly, you can do something really epic with this Cornerstone and really get a lot of value out of it. I think that's going to be very difficult to do though. So for that reason, I'm putting travel rations in the C tier. I would love to see somebody have a really good game with this and prove me right that you can in fact make good use of travel rations, but we'll see. We'll see when that day comes. And here it is, Secure Trail. Secure Trail going in above Lost in the Wilds and Surprise Child. It's another population control Cornerstone. It is C tier. It's very situational. Golden Marrow. Golden Marrow is quite simple. Gain 2 amber for every 20 sea marrow produced. On Queen's Hand mode, you're going to have smaller sea marrow stacks. In general, it's just not as good as we originally thought. There's not too much more to say about it. It just doesn't stand up to the test of time as well as some of the other Cornerstones have. So Golden Marrow is going down to C tier. And let's reveal our last Cornerstone here, Training Grounds. Why is this one getting demoted from B tier down to C tier? The settlement specializes in training gear production, gain +1 to lizard resolve for every 70 training gear produced. This is the same thing as Beavers with Vineyard Town, and I originally had this one as B tier and Vineyard Town as C tier, but I think Vineyard Town is actually showing that it's maybe slightly better than Training Grounds. Beavers generally benefit quite a bit from wine, and making wine is not so difficult to do if you find reeds or something like that. Training gear, I think, is a little bit more difficult to produce, since you need planks and copper bars. And yeah, you can use stone and reeds, but you need both of those things for it to be good. If you don't have one of them, then the recipe for training gear isn't so great. I think this deserves to be in the C tier, which is exactly where it's getting demoted to, right below Vineyard Town. All right, and you can see Firekeeper armor used to be at the bottom of B, now it's at the top of C. And what usurped it? It's a new Cornerstone actually, Obsidian Runestone. You can see it here, very straightforward, just increases your hearth resistance by 400. Compare this to Firekeeper's armor, which is 50 reduction for every Blightrot burn. So if you stack this up against Firekeeper's armor, you'd have to burn 8 Blightrots with Firekeeper's armor for it to gain its equivalent value compared to Obsidian Runestone. Which you could argue that Firekeeper's armor is better because in situations where you have like 25 Blight, it is going to outperform Obsidian Runestone in the long run. Why would you want Obsidian Runestone in that case? Well, obviously, these are very comparable Cornerstones. I think Obsidian Runestone and Firekeeper's armor are very similar to each other. I do slightly prefer Obsidian Runestone, which is why I'm putting it in the B tier and Firekeeper's armor in the C tier. I think the static 400 benefit you get from Obsidian Runestone is just overall more consistent. So that's Obsidian Runestone. Not too much else to say about this. You don't really need to be drafting Blight-related Cornerstones. That hasn't changed. And moving up, we have, and I have to apologize because this is the one I was most wrong about probably, Crowded Caravan. Crowded Caravan coming in near the bottom of the B tier, and frankly, I don't think it deserves better than that. All my original criticisms of Crowded Caravan still stand. It's going to make it more difficult for you to gain resources that are associated with accepting newcomers. You may potentially increase your hostility too high. But if you find yourself in that situation where you have 6 people in your starting group and no obvious way to increase your population size, sometimes this is the greatest possible Cornerstone. Sometimes you just need this. And you have to be able to identify those situations. If this is year 1, year 3, Crowded Caravan could be very good for you. If it's past year 1, year 3, it's going to be a little bit more suspicious. But even then, like, there's some some quests, some orders that require you to have certain population size or certain number of certain species. Crowded Caravan will help you get there. So this is B tier, I think. It's you want to be drafting this at the right time, but it's it does have its applications. This is one I have to call out and say I was probably the most wrong about this, putting it way down here. I think it's not like an amazing Cornerstone, but it's something you want to look out for and something you do want to draft in the right situation. All right. Next up in the B tier, we have value-added tax. And this is not really changed, actually, in terms of its position in the tier list, but it has changed as a result of the devs updating the game. So let's take a quick look at it. Packs of trade goods are worth 25% more when sold through trade routes or directly to traders. This used to be you just gain amber when you produce pack of trade goods. Now it gives you more amber for selling them. I think the value here is potentially higher than it used to be, especially if you get trade routes. Like, you get your trade route levels up, you can sell for, 25% more on top of pack of trade goods already sell for a lot. There's some really high potential there. Value added tax, I think this is basically where it was before. There are some disadvantages to not getting the amber straight away and having to sell the trade goods to get the value, but I think it's okay. I think it's still just about where it was, and because it has a higher ceiling, I think it kind of compensates for that negative impact of not getting the amber right away. Moving on, we have Woodcutter Song. Here's a new one. Guys. So let's take a look at it. This actually increases your global resolve, but only temporarily. It's off to work we go. For every 20 felled trees, global resolve is increased by 3 for 120 seconds, which is 1/4 of the drizzle clearance cycle, right? That's 1/4 of the drizzle clearance cycle, collectively, both of them put together. And I mentioned that because drizzle clearance is usually when you're making plays to try to gain reputation through resolve. So this is when you want to be triggering your Woodcutter Song. I mean, you could also use this during the storm, +3 resolve to help shore up your resolve during the storm. That's fine too. Every 20 trees is a decent amount of trees. It's going to take them a little while to chop 20 trees. So overall, you're not going to get that much global resolve out of Woodcutter Song, but I think any epic cornerstone that provides global resolve is worth considering. And this is a reasonably solid one, and you can kind of control when this triggers by adjusting your woodcutter speed. Woodcutter Song is good. It's not great though. This goes in the B tier, fairly middle of the road. I think it's a good pick most of the time, and I would tend to pick this more than decline it. If I have a choice, unless I desperately need the amber. Moving up, we still have things like Fiber Delivery Line, Fungal Guide, Meat Specialization. These haven't moved too much. Sahilda's is still rocking the top of the B tier. And coming right below Sahilda's, we have a new one from the Ashes. Actually, technically, I consider this used to be Extraction Tools. The Extraction Tools used to be a D tier legendary cornerstone, and this is a different cornerstone. It's not Extraction Tools, but in my mind, it is. Because if you look at the evolution of Extraction Tools, I think it basically got replaced with this cornerstone. And then it got bumped down to being a legendary from an epic, which was one of the best decisions I think the devs have made. So from the Ashes, gain 2 Wildfire Essence every 2 completed Dangerous or Forbidden Glade events. And it's not retroactive, and it doesn't count cloned events from Fishman Caves and Bloodflowers. This is okay. The problem with this is it's not retroactive. You're likely to get 2 Wildfire Essence out of it. If you get it early on, maybe up to 4. If you do 4 Dangerous Forbidden Glade events, you can get a total of 4 Wildfire Essence from this. If you think about how much amber each of those is worth, is it better declining this? And the answer is well, maybe. Because if you get 2 Wildfire Essence, that's kind of comparable to 10 amber of value. And if you get 4, okay, now you're doing better. But from the Ashes, the one thing I can say about this is Wildfire Essence is a limited resource. You're not guaranteed to find it on traders. You do get it from orders sometime, but on Queen's Hand mode, if you're just starting out and you don't have any upgrades that increase your caravans, your starting good caravans by 20%, you will only have 4 Wildfire Essence in your initial caravan, and that's enough for 1 hearth. From the Ashes, if you get even 1 tick of this, it gives you 2 more Wildfire Essence. That's enough to put down your 3rd hearth total. So from the Ashes, I think it's okay, because it allows you to put down your 3rd hearth, and this is an epic cornerstone. I mean, what else do you want from it? This thing, it used to be very bad. I think it used to be 1 Wildfire Essence for every 2, and it used to be a legendary, and then before that it was Extraction Tools, which was useless. So I'm tentatively putting this one in the B tier. I think it's not that good. You can decline this one a reasonable amount of the time, but if you're playing on Queen's Hand mode, you may very much want that 2 Wildfire Essence. That does it for our B tier. Let's move up into A. And in the A tier, at approximately the same position that we had this thing before, you can see Cannibalism. And Cannibalism was actually buffed very recently. Let's check it out. Gain 40 meat every time a villager dies or leaves, as opposed to 30. So they buffed it by 1/3, 33%, which is substantial. That's substantial. And I like this one for the same reason I always did, which is if you're starving, if people are dying because you don't have food, this will help prevent that from happening. And losing the game due to starvation is a very real concern. That's something that happens to us a lot. Gaining some insurance of people dying due to starvation is a good thing. I think with the buff, this actually kind of pays. I'm not going to say it pays for itself, but I think it justifies itself. If you stack this up against Blood Price Contract is giving you 10 amber. This is giving you 40 meat. And I would say 4 meat is definitely worth more than 1 amber, especially if people are dying because they're starving. They can't eat amber, right? They can eat the meat. So Cannibalism, I do like this one still. I think it's okay. It's a good hedge. It's a little bit of a protective thing. And we've had some games with this where it worked out for us. So Cannibalism, I think it's still bottom of the A tier for epic cornerstones. It's not bad. I just wanted to highlight this because it did get buffed recently. Moving on, we have Hidden Reward. This is getting bumped. Hidden Reward used to be in the B tier. Hidden Reward is now in the A tier. And I think this has just been a very consistent performer. Like, check this out. Gain 1 ancient tablet for every 2 completed Glade events. And keep in mind, this is any Glade event, not just Dangerous or Forbidden. And it's retroactive. On the Scarlet Orchard, obviously this has huge benefits. Tablets are not easy to come by. Tablets are not given as rewards for orders. Tablets are something you have to find on the map from Glade events typically. This is one of the only other ways you can get tablets. Tablets are 8 gold each, or 8 amber each. So they are quite good. Like if you just get 1 tablet from this, that very nearly pays for itself. If you get 2, then you're definitely getting more than your 10 amber you would have got from declining. And because this is retroactive, because this affects any Glade event and not just Dangerous Forbidden, I think this is actually quite good, and it pays for itself relatively quickly. It's very rarely a bad choice, especially for an epic Cornerstone. I think this is just very solid. Probably pick this one a lot. And we had this previously in the B tier. Hidden Reward going up to A tier. Very well deserved. Very high, very pumping, high value Cornerstone. Love to see it. Yep, Hidden Reward. Pick this one often. That's my take on Hidden Reward. Okay, moving up to the next thing in the A tier, we have Prosperous Archaeology getting demoted from S tier. I know, crazy. Crazy, guys. Prosperous Archaeology. How could we demote this one? Gain 1 global resolve every time you open 2 caches. Well, the reason I'm demoting this one is because if I see this on year 1 on Queen's Hand mode, there's a very strong chance I'll decline it because you need Amber to open Glades. And unfortunately, if you spend most of the game not opening caches, which could definitely happen, like opening caches takes specific resources, you're not going to get any stacks on this. And maybe you're only getting like 1 global resolve on this by the end of the game or 2. And if you're spam opening caches at that point, like maybe you're winning the game anyways, like you're doing it with tools. So this doesn't provide as much of a benefit then. I think this is still good because it provides +1 global resolve for every stack, which is great. And for an epic Cornerstone, anything that gives you global resolve is good. But you may have to decline this early on if you see it on a very high difficulty Queen's Hand game. So Prosperous Archaeology is getting nerfed from, or getting bumped down from S tier to A tier, which I think is where it belongs. And then we have Friendly Relations, another similar story to Prosperous Archaeology. Compared to Prosperous Archaeology, boost global resolve by 1 for every 3 levels of trading, standing with trade routes. This is additionally actually kind of difficult on Queen's Hand mode, because on Queen's Hand mode, if you're starting out, you're only going to have 1 city you can trade with, which is the Queen, and then you build up to 4 total cities. If you have only 1 city you can trade with, this is basically worthless, and you're going to decline it every time. Now, of course, if you're just playing regular games, you're going to have cities to trade with. This is mostly for like Queen's Hand. This kind of loses some of its value. But trade routes are still very high potency, and I like this. Like, this is still a very easy way to get global resolve stacks if you have the trade routes that you can send them on. So, Friendly Relations, good Cornerstone, but not S tier. I think you may end up declining this, similar to Prosperous Archaeology. So, that's Friendly Relations. Hate to see it. And we have one thing to note here in the S tier, which is Bed and Breakfast. Yes, we did it. We did it, guys. Bed and Breakfast. Let's put that one on the screen. Everyone loves this Cornerstone. This thing is insane. Gain 10 amber every time a trader arrives. I originally had this one at the top of the A tier, but I think that's not doing it justice. This thing is really, really packing a punch. We've gotten like easily 50, 60 amber off this in games before. For an epic Cornerstone, it's absolutely nutty. Even in the late game, like if you have 1 trader showing up, that'll pay for itself right away, as a, compared to declining it. So this just happens, and yeah, you can summon traders. Bed and Breakfast has shown over the course of lots and lots of gameplay that Bed and Breakfast is an insanely good Cornerstone, and should almost always be picked. So it's going in the S tier for epic Cornerstones, and it's going to stay there. I don't really see, unless they nerf it, of course, which please don't, devs. This thing is great. Don't change this thing. So Bed and Breakfast, great Cornerstone, and it's going in the S tier for epic. And let's take one final look at our tier list and see if there's anything else I want to comment on here. Like, obviously things like prayer books, silent looting are still excellent, and I did decide to keep silent looting. I think the hostility reduction is actually better than Prosperous Archaeology, so silent looting is staying in S tier. Titan belt is still amazing. Anything that saves you cost on provisions for trade routes is amazing. Advanced herbalism and friends, like anything that helps your farming, and these only show up if you have the relevant farming building, so additional reason to like this. Peasant supply is still amazing. Generous gifts still amazing. Yeah, a lot of these things haven't changed. So there you have it. These are your epic Cornerstones. My biggest takeaway from this is the population control Cornerstones. I think we had most of those in the D tier before, and I think they all mostly belong in the C tier, and Crowded Caravans going in the low B, because is a very specific case where I think Crowded Caravans is useful. Here we have the legendary tier list, and you can see, I think this has the most changes in it compared to any of the other 2 tier lists. And you can see S tier is still mostly the same. There's a lot of things going into B tier that were not there previously or that were at new additions to the game. And D tier is all new. D tier is entirely new. And before we get started on that, rest in peace. It's so over. Cheap construction is kill. The devs absolutely got rid of it, and it's not coming back. Presumably. I don't know. Maybe it's coming back. But cheap construction was one of the greatest cornerstones in the game. Like, I would say, in hindsight, if cheap construction still existed, I would probably put it in the number 2 spot behind Rebellious Spirit. I think it really was that good. It was simply absurdly strong. And yeah, I'm sad to see it go. So that announcement first. Let's do the same thing. Let's go into the D tier and look in reverse order and go through all of these legendary cornerstones and discuss why they are where they are. Starting out with a relatively hot take. Hidden from the Queen. Yeah, I'm done. I'm done with Hidden from the Queen. I'm done making excuses for this cornerstone, and people should not be drafting this. So what happened is they nerfed it. We used to have this in the A tier, and it did actually get changed. So it's still the same in the sense that impatience does not grow when villagers die. However, if you make it to year 9, your impatience skyrockets, going up 600% faster, not 60%, 600% faster. And that basically means you lose the game starting on year 9. Now, I know, like, you should be winning the game before year 9. If you make it to year 9, usually that means something went wrong. But I just don't see this. Like, yeah, this cornerstone does combo with other things, but the problem is you're not going to hedge your game on being able to sacrifice villagers and pull off some combo. Like, yes, in theory, there's a very lucrative combo you can pull off with Hidden from the Queen and a couple other cornerstones, and we'll discuss that. But I'm not about, you only get 3 legendary cornerstones per game. It's not a good idea to like hedge your bets on finding the exact combination, as I like to say, to assemble Exodia and then win the game with the Hidden from the Queen cornerstone. Yeah, in theory it's possible, but I think this is terrible. I would not be upset if the devs took this out of the game. Frankly, honestly, I don't know how they should balance this. But now that it makes your impatience grow faster starting on year 9, I just can't justify picking this. I think people should avoid picking this really all the time at any skill level. And that's my hot take on Hidden from the Queen. All right, moving on to the next thing in the D tier, we have Queen's Gift. This isn't too surprising. I think Queen's Gift was rated in the C tier before, and it just increases your hearth resistance. But okay, why are we demoting this one? It gives you 150 hearth resistance for every woodcutter in your settlement. So if you run 3 woodcutters, you can get up to 450 hearth resistance and then maybe more from there. That's like okay, right? The problem with this is you're not going to be able to woodcut during the storm necessarily. I think, yeah, you're not going to be able to woodcut during the storm, and you've got something like Obsidian Runestone, which gives you 400 hearth resistance, which is basically the same as having 3 woodcutters with Queen's Gift. And that's an epic cornerstone. That's epic. And then you have Firekeeper's Armor, which is kind of comparable and fine. For a legendary cornerstone, this thing just does not do it. I think there's simply too many better options out there other than Queen's Gift. And I don't know, if they buffed this one a bit more, I would say maybe I could justify moving it out of the D tier. But for now, I'm going to put this thing in the D tier, and I think the limitations on this are too great for it to even be considered, really. Like, there's very, very few situations where I would justify drafting Queen's Gift over something else, or declining it, you know. So Queen's Gift going in the D tier. Next up we have From the Shadows. This is a new cornerstone, so let's definitely take a look at this one. This is one added in the recent patch. From the Shadows, confused, empty-eyed creatures emerge from the hearth. Every time Voice of the Sealed Ones triggers after the hearth reaches 100% corruption, 3 new villagers appear in the settlement. So what this means is if you lose 3 people to Blightrot, like if the Blightrot triggers, then you just gain 3 new villagers. So 3 people die and you gain 3 new villagers. Which seems okay on the surface, right? Like it prevents you from losing people to Blightrot, but you still gain impatience from that. You're still going to gain the full impatience from losing all those people. And so this does combo with Hidden from the Queen. If you actually have Hidden from the Queen and From the Shadows, what it means is you actually don't need to fight the Blight at all. You can just sit there and let the Blight happen over and over and over again, and you're not going to gain any impatience, and you're just going to cycle villagers. And it's kind of fine. And you don't have to worry about making Perching Fire, worry about fighting the Blight at all. It's just fine. Yeah, there's some crazy combos you can do off that. And that's what I was hinting at before with Hidden from the Queen, is there's actually some really insane combos you could do with Hidden from the Queen and From the Shadows, and then like also imagine if you get Blood Price Contract in that. There's so much potential there. However, you have to get 2 very specific legendary cornerstones, and the odds of that happening are very low. And if you and by themselves, these cornerstones are just not good. Hidden from the Queen and From the Shadows by themselves, they're simply not good enough. I don't think it's well balanced, because the issue with this Cornerstone is it's either completely useless, really, or it's absolutely busted if you get it with Hidden from the Queen. I don't think this is well balanced, and I think it should be removed, but I'm rating it in the D tier because I would probably never pick this myself. Unless you somehow had Hidden from the Queen, which I would never draft. So yeah, From the Shadows, just don't take it. My strong advice on From the Shadows is probably don't take it unless you really want to go for an absolute hilarious play and just sacrifice people to the hearth over and over and over again. And rounding out our D tier, we have Mark of the Sealed Ones, another new Cornerstone. And remember, they removed Cheap Construction at the same time they added these Cornerstones in, which is really sad. I think they took out Cheap Construction and they added in all these Cornerstones that are just weak. What does this do? Well, the Ancient Hearth is being corrupted, resources sacrificed within it burn 50% quicker. So the issue with this is a few things. Firstly, sacrificing resources is not something you want to do. It's something you kind of have to do some of the time, and you want to keep sacrifices to a minimum. And this is why I dunked on the temple so much, why the temple is a bad building, because getting extra sacrifice time, it's just not that good. It's just not that useful. This very specifically applies while the hearth is being corrupted, which is like, okay, so you can only use this during the storm, period. And also your hearth has to be corrupted. So the uptime of Mark of the Sealed Ones is very low, even in ideal circumstances. It's just very low uptime. If you want extra sacrifice time, there's an epic Cornerstone that will get you extra sacrifice time based on your impatience, which is better. Mark of the Sealed Ones is just not there. For a legendary Cornerstone, this is bad. It needs to be something different. I don't know. I know they were trying to make blight related Cornerstones, but this is simply too weak. It's simply too conditional, too weak. Doesn't provide enough of a benefit. I think if they gave it like doubling chance on it, like, I don't know, 15% doubling chance while your hearth is being corrupted or something along those lines, it may be better, but this is just not good enough. And I think frankly, Mark of the Sealed Ones deserves D tier rating. So that's it. That's our D tier. Mark of the Sealed Ones, From the Shadows, Queen's Gift, Hidden from the Queen. And let's move on to the C tier. Got some similar things in here that you may have seen before, and additionally, Without Restrictions. Ooh, yeah, big shock and awe on this one. This is one where I have to admit, I was wrong. This Cornerstone did not really change at all. Didn't really change at all. And let's take a look at it right now. Villagers have 10% higher chance of producing double goods, but consumption control is disabled. And that's a very big but, by the way. It's a very big but. Because losing consumption control is very limiting. Very limiting. Now, the reason why I'm putting this in C tier as opposed to like even worse tier is I think if you're a newer player, then losing your consumption control doesn't really matter that much. If you're a relatively new player and you're still getting used to the game, just take your 10% doubling chance. It's totally fine. You're probably not going to be doing fancy things with consumption control as a newer player, so that's all good. If you're playing at a higher skill level, you absolutely need to be leveraging your consumption control to deny people food, to conserve coats. Like, there's so many things you need to do that for. And like, also imagine if you get the Fishman Oracle, you cannot do the right solve if you take Without Restrictions. It's simply not going to happen. Like, people will die. Without Restrictions, this is a fairly bad Cornerstone. Like, just the consumption controls disabled is too limiting. So we originally had this one rated fairly high, but it is going all the way down to C tier. And yeah, I have to say about this one, I was wrong. And this is one that we learned through gameplay and through becoming better at the game why this one is bad. So Without Restrictions, probably don't draft this unless you're a new player, in which case, you know, knock yourself out. It's going to be fine in that case. So that's Without Restrictions, going like fairly near the bottom of the list here. Next up, we have Bone Tools. And yeah, we don't need to discuss Bone Tools too much. This is kind of the same deal as Blood Price Contract, right? This gives you tools whenever somebody dies. Gain 3 tools every time a villager leaves or dies, which it's just the same problem as Blood Price Contract, really. And this is a legendary, so you'd expect better from it, but it's just not good enough. Not good enough. You can't be sacrificing people on Queen's Hand difficulty really easily. And yeah, if you get some nonsense like Bone Tools and Hidden from the Queen and the new Cornerstone that gives you people back for people dying to the Blight, then yeah, Bone Tools will cycle an infinite amount of tools for you. But like, that's why I'm saying it's like assembling Exodia, because it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And especially not on a higher difficulty when maybe you have limited Cornerstone choices anyway. Yeah, Bone Tools, just probably don't pick it. For a legendary Cornerstone, it's not good enough. I'm demoting it to C tier. I think it does still have some niche cases where you can pick it, which is why I'm leaving it in C as opposed to D, but probably don't take this most often. More often than not, you're not going to take it. Okay, Farsight. More like Farsight. Some of you got that joke. All right, let's take a look at Farsight. This is a new Cornerstone compared to the last time we made this tier list. Discovering a small glade increases the working speed of scouts investigating dangerous or forbidden glade events by 50% for 180 seconds. So for 3 minutes, you get 50% more glade event work speed, and 50% is a lot, but this only applies for 3 minutes. and it only applies to dangerous and forbidden glade events. So the reason I don't like Farsight is this does not give you glade event work speed for like caches or things like that. And yes, glade event work speed does matter for things like that because you want your workers to be faster. Sometimes you absolutely need to get a victory point in time to prevent losing the game. Things like on the Scarlet Orchard, when you're doing the solves for the archaeological discoveries, you want work speed on that because they take forever. So this doesn't apply to very much. It applies to dangerous forbidden glade events, and that's it. And you have to open a small glade to do that, which is like maybe you don't want to open small glades. That's more hostility. And this only applies for 3 minutes. For a legendary cornerstone, I think this could be an epic cornerstone, and it would be a decent epic cornerstone. But as a legendary cornerstone, I just don't see it. I think it's not good enough. I think this needs to apply to all glade events, not just dangerous or forbidden. If this applied to every glade event rather than just dangerous forbidden glade events, then I would say this is viable. But as it stands, I just don't think it is. It's C tier. You know, you can avoid a bad effect on dangerous forbidden glade events with this, but more often than not, you're just going to decline this or take the alternative. So that's Farsight. All right, we got economic migration, royal guard training, urban planning, and I think economic migration, I'll just put a footnote on this. This one was changed. This economic migration, it was buffed a little bit. It's based on trade routes. It gives you more goods with the trade routes, but you have to get trade route levels to stack this thing, and I'm not quite seeing it. For a legendary cornerstone, I think it starts off too slow. By the time it matters, by the time you get stacks on your trade routes, it really isn't doing much for you. So economic migration C tier, but I think it used to be in here, right? All right, let's go to the next thing. Lumber tax. So this is another one which isn't a huge shift. We originally had this one in the B tier, and I know originally when I made my tier list, a lot of people were skeptical about lumber tax, and rightfully so. Gain 1 amber for every 50 wood produced. If you're playing on the Royal Woodlands and you have beavers, then yeah, you can draft lumber tax and you'll get your value out of it. But realistically, you're gonna struggle to get 10 amber out of this thing. Like by the end of the game, you're very unlikely to have 20 amber out of it. And if you're playing on a map that isn't the Royal Woodlands, it's going to be even more difficult. Lumber tax, yeah, not much else has changed about this. It's just that we've realized it does not provide very much value compared to other cornerstones. I think this one needs to be buffed to give 1 amber for every like 40 wood potentially. I think that would be more balanced for a legendary cornerstone. All right, next up in the C tier, we have Secure Perimeter. And this is a new one. This is a new edition cornerstone. Secure Perimeter. Yeah, there's a lot of text here. Oh, they actually nerfed this recently. Yeah, completing a Forbidden Glade event reduces the hostility from Dangerous and Forbidden Glades by 2, which is actually 6 on high difficulty, and Small Glades by 1. So it reduces 6 hostility for every Dangerous Forbidden Glade, and 3 hostility for every Small Glade. And the condition of that is you have to solve a Forbidden Glade event. And this does stack every time you complete a Forbidden Glade event. So if you complete 2 Forbidden Glade events, now you're getting like 12 hostility reduced, and 6, respectively, for Dangerous and Small Glades. Which is... You know, I mean, hostility reduction is always good. This used to be the case that you just had to discover a Forbidden Glade to get the benefit, which I think they should go back to. I guess, like from a flavor standpoint, it makes more sense to do it this way, but I'm not seeing it. I think this Cornerstone is simply too weak. You're not opening Forbidden Glades most of the time. There are some cases where you will draft this, but it's just too slow to be providing very much value for you. All right, up next we have Calming Water. And this is getting demoted from the B tier. This hasn't really changed at all. Let's take a look at it. This just gives you, again, hostility reduction based on using 150 units of water in rain engines. But using 150 units of water in rain engines actually takes a while. Remember, on the Sealed Forest, you need to use 600 units of rainwater to win the game. To win the game on Sealed Forest, you need to use 600 units of rainwater. And that would equate to 40 points of hostility reduction. And 40 hostility reduction, it's like, it's okay, but it's not great, right? And you're almost never going to use 600 units of rainwater in rain engines, like unless you're playing on the Sealed Forest. And if you do that, you're basically winning the game at that point. So like, why do you care about the hostility reduction? I think Calming Water, yeah, because it's hostility reduction, it's still going to have a spot in the C tier, but this thing is very slow. I think it just needs a bit of a buff. Like change it to like every 125 units of water in rain engines, maybe slightly less than that. Yeah, Calming Water, just in practice, this is not really panned out as a good cornerstone, and you should consider drafting different ones. And at the top of the C tier, we have Frequent Caravans. So this one actually got completely reworked. And by completely reworked, I mean it's similar, but every time a caravan trade route finishes, impatience grows 30% slower for 3 minutes. This is situational. It's very situational. I kind of feel like maybe it should have been in the B tier, but that's fine. We're going to leave it at the top of the C tier as kind of a flagship for the C tier, which is it's very situational and it's decent inside of that situation, which is if you're struggling with impatience. And on Queen's Hand mode, you may struggle with impatience, so it could be useful. But if you're playing outside of Queen's Hand mode on an easier game, this doesn't provide you any direct value. You typically want cornerstones that are providing you resources, hostility reduction. Frequent Caravans doesn't do that. This thing used to provide Global Resolve, which was much better. Now it does not. There are some situations where you should draft Frequent Caravans, though, if you get kind of on pressure from impatience. If you're playing on Land of Greed, this could help you. So there is a time and a place for Frequent Caravans, but after the rework, this thing isn't as good as it used to be. It's not as general purpose as it used to be, so I don't think it's A tier. Certainly not A tier anymore. Top of the C tier is tentatively where I want to put this one. And that's our C tier. Let's move on to the B tier, which you can see is very big, and there's a lot of things in here. At the very bottom, we got Back to Nature. That hasn't changed very much. And above that, we have Trade Hub. Trade Hub is getting demoted from the A tier, but Trade Hub was changed. Gain 1 reputation point every time you sell goods worth 60 amber. However, fulfilling orders awards 50% less reputation. And this was after a change where they had it such that you gain 25% reputation from resolve as a penalty. And then they changed that to orders being 50%. And I do like this more with orders, I believe. Orders are very important for the game. Like, obviously, you want to be completing orders and getting reputation points from orders. But you will reach a point eventually where you've completed most of the orders you're going to complete. And then it's kind of like at the end of the game, if you get this on year 6 or something, it's actually quite good. You'll have completed most of the orders you're going to complete by then. And then you could just like spam all of your accumulated wealth onto traders and get free rep points for that. So Trade Hub is pretty good in that situation. Yeah, you want to be careful with this. As like a year 2 pick, it's probably quite bad. As a year 4, you use your judgment. Year 6 is when you really want this thing. And it does provide a very direct way to win the game that's different from any other path. So I do like Trade Hub for that reason. Yeah, just be careful with it. I'm putting this one in the B tier. Because of the change, it's not as good as it used to be. But that's okay. It's still got a situation where it's good. So Trade Hub is going down to the B tier, kind of near the bottom. Because you want to be very careful with drafting it. Like I said, I think it's mostly a year 6 thing. Above that, we have Dual Carriage System. Dual Carriage System is a new cornerstone. Let's take a look at this. This has to do with haulers. The Rainpunk hauling carts will be assigned to the main warehouse to help transport resources between buildings. Sorry, 2 Rainpunk building carts. This just gives you 2 free workers, kind of. It gives you 2 free workers who are haulers. Now, the funny thing about these carts is I think they are assigned to the main warehouse, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to stay there. They'll kind of bounce all over the place. And this is all right. Like, it's basically 2 free workers that are haulers. And haulers are less valuable than your average worker because haulers, we've discussed that, they kind of do random things. And these ones, you actually can't turn them off, really. Like, they're just going to keep going and doing hauling. But it is still, in a way, 2 workers. And I don't dislike that. So Dual Carriage System is going in the B tier. I don't dislike this one. It's always a reasonable pick. You're almost never going to decline this one, I would say. All right, moving up, we have Counterfeit Amber, and this was actually changed. Counterfeit Amber, I think it's approximately the same position. We had this one in the B tier before, but it did change. And I think it is marginally better from what it used to be. And I'm kind of surprised they changed this one because it used to have to do with Blight Rot, and they made a big point of introducing cornerstones that have to do with Blight Rot, but then they changed this one. Gain 10 Amber every time you use 50 units of water and rain engines, but traders will have 1 less perk or blueprint for sale. I tend to like this one a bit better. I think if you compare this one to the water, the calming water, this gives you 30 amber in place of 10 hostility reduction, which I kind of prefer, I think. And this gives you more frequently, right? Like, you only have to get 50 units of water to get your 10 amber and to pay for itself. So I do like that. This will allow you to buy more perks or blueprints from traders, but of course they'll have 1 less for sale. But usually with the amber, especially on Queen's Hand mode, you're going to be purchasing goods rather than perks and cornerstones from traders. So I think this is still fine. Counterfeit Amber, it's going to stay in the B tier. I do like it a little bit more, but it's just kind of different. It's just kind of different since the change. It used to spawn Blight Rots, now it kind of nerfs traders a little bit. Let's move on to the next one. We have Master Blueprint, and this is a completely new cornerstone as well. It was introduced a little while ago. So let's talk about it. And they changed it. They changed it after they introduced it as well. This unlocks all camps. All small camps go to their advanced versions, has gathering speed decreased by 50% until you use up at least 300 resource node charges. So this used to be that you just had to, when they first released this, and I liked it better that way, you just had to expire 10 nodes and you could actually delete them. You could like open a small glade, find 5 nodes in there and delete all 5 nodes. And if you did that, this would be like halfway to resolved. But now they changed it so you can't do that anymore. You have to actually gather nodes. You have to gather 300 nodes. And keep in mind, you'll have a gathering speed decreased by 50%. this isn't great because it decreases your gathering speed so much. The immediate benefit you get from unlocking the large camps is kind of mitigated because they're actually going to be slower than your small camps were until you gather 300 resource nodes. Now, of course, this is good because it takes blueprints out of the blueprint pool. You're going to have a slightly less bogged down blueprint pool when you have 3 things unlocked. And this allows you to gather from all the large nodes that you may find, which is good. Like sometimes you need to do that. But ultimately, this drawback of 50% decreased gathering speed, it's pretty substantial. And I picked this in a game recently on the Coral Forest. It definitely showed the restriction here. And if you have things like reeds and stone, they gather very fast, like 4-second gather time or so. Now this will decrease the speed of gathering those as well, which is an unfortunate side effect. And you can try to clear 300 reed stone to get rid of this penalty. But by the time you get rid of this penalty, it's going to be near the end of the game anyways. I think Master Blueprint, this thing is okay, but it comes with a very severe drawback. I wish it went back to the way it was, where you could kind of cheese it a little bit more. But as it is, I think it's B tier Cornerstone. This is decent, but you want to be very cautious of the drawback. It's not like a slam dunk like you may think. All right. Coming up next, we have Cooking Steam. And this actually got buffed by 50%. So food production speed is increased by 15% for every 50 units of drizzle water stored. It used to be 10% cooking speed for every 50 units of drizzle water stored. So because of the buff, I think this is 50% better. I do like it. If you have a rain collector and you just sit on all the green water, you can get up to 15% food production speed. And that applies to gathering speed as well. If you're gathering berries off the map, that does apply to your berry camp. So this is quite good in terms of it applies to a fair number of recipes that you will be working on. I think with the buff, it's actually in a good spot. So Cooking Steam is going to B tier from C, thanks to the buff. And that was a very necessary buff, I think. So glad to see it. Next up, we have Hauling Cart. This is another similar to the dual carriage system thing. Let's take a look at it. We've got Hauling Cart. This is very similar, except it assigns 1 cart to every warehouse in your settlement, and that does count the main warehouse. So really, the only difference between dual carriage system and hauling cart is dual carriage system is a flat 2 carts. Hauling cart gives you 1 per warehouse, counting your main warehouse. So you'll break even on hauling cart compared to dual carriage system after having only 1 extra warehouse. And then for every warehouse you have after that, you're actually getting even more value out of it, which I think makes this one better. Hauling cart, I think you're more likely to have more warehouses than 2, right? So I like hauling cart better than dual carriage system. And yeah, otherwise it's just more additional haulers. It's free workers. It's the same thing as dual carriage system. So hauling cart is going to be rated slightly higher than dual carriage system, but still B tier. All right, above Calming the Forest, we have Crowded Houses. Now, this one is getting bumped down from A tier to B tier, and a lot of the reason for that is going to be Queen's Hand mode. All houses have room for 1 more villager. On Queen's Hand mode, you do not have special houses unlocked. Really, the only reason why you want this Cornerstone is if you have special houses. If you have Harpy houses, Lizard houses, Beaver houses, all those things. This gives you 50% more space in all of those houses, which is pretty good. It's pretty good. You can think of it in terms of like cheap construction. It's doing something similar for you. So I like crowded houses in that way. But if you're playing on Queen's Hand mode, you will only have shelters to start with, and you're not likely to get all of the housing unlocks anyways. So crowded houses, if you're not using special houses, then crowded houses is kind of bad. And for that, I think it doesn't deserve a spot in the A tier anymore. I think crowded houses is more B tier, because on higher difficulty games, and if you don't have your houses unlocked, it's just not good. So crowded houses going in the B tier. That's like a fairly big demotion, I would say. Market Shift Plan. Let's take a look at this one. This is another new Cornerstone. It was introduced at the same time as the building one. So what this does is it unlocks 2 more trade routes for you. For every city that you have available to trade, it unlocks 2 more trade routes. And the penalty here is you have to complete at least 3 trade routes. And until you do, traders will not show up at your settlement. And in fact, they leave immediately once you take this Cornerstone. So you have to complete 3 trade routes, which is going to be easy to do because you're getting 2 additional trade routes and potentially 8 additional trade routes, right? 2 per city. So you should have 2 times 4 is 8 additional trade routes. And what's the value on those trade routes? If you haven't unlocked any trade route at all, then the next trade route costs 5 amber. It costs 5, then 10, then 15. So if you want to get 5 trade routes with one city, you have to pay 30 amber to do that. And this gets you 2 trade routes. Now, what you can do is you can unlock 1 trade route with all of your cities and then take Market Shift Plan, and it'll get you all 5. You'll have 20 trade routes in that case, which is pretty good. And the last 2 trade routes cost 10 amber and 15 amber respectively. So this on paper is giving you 100 amber worth of value if you invested 20 amber to unlock trade routes, or if you have beavers, in which case you'll have those trade routes unlocked automatically. This is potentially giving you 100 amber of value, 10 and 15 times 4, which is quite good. It's either going to give you 60 or 100 amber of value if you have no trader outs or one trader out locked, one trader out unlocked. So yeah, this is on paper a lot of amber that it can reward you, and the downside isn't so bad. Now, if you're not really benefiting from trade routes, if you only have one city you can trade with, this is not going to provide as much. And if you've already unlocked trade routes, then obviously this isn't going to do very much for you. So draft this a little bit cautiously, but market shift plan, I do like this one in general. I think it makes trading a lot easier. And of course, if you have only one city you can trade with, then don't take this. It's pretty bad in that case. So that's market shift plan. Coming in on the B tier, kind of midway here. And above market shift plan, we have Reckless Plunder, yet another new legendary cornerstone. They added a lot of legendary cornerstones, I'm noticing, compared to everything else, because everyone loves legendary cornerstones, they pop. Increases the chance of doubling loot from abandoned caches by 100%. This does not apply to perks and blueprints. It only applies to like physical items like copper bars, for instance. But newly discovered resource nodes have fewer charges, 5 for small and 15 for large. This is pretty good. I'm a big fan of Old Fedora Hat, which you'll see is still in the A tier. Old Fedora Hat just gives you a 50% chance to double off of anything. This only applies to caches specifically, whereas Old Fedora Hat works for caches, it works for glade events, and things like the destroyed or the Rainpunk Drill, those things that you might find in small glades. It works for all that stuff. Reckless Plunder only works for caches, but getting double goods off of caches can be a lot. Like, caches tend to have a lot of goodies in them. And Reckless Plunder can give you just a lot of raw materials in the right circumstance. So Reckless Plunder is going in the B tier, reasonably high up in the B tier. I do like this one quite a bit. If you're able to open caches at all, this is going to provide a decent amount of value. And even if you're doing it with tools, you're still going to get extra amber from doing this. So Reckless Plunder is not bad. And now let's move up to near the top of the B tier. We have Woodpecker Technique. I don't have too much to say about this one. This is just gain 2 insects every time you chop down a tree during the storm. Originally, it was here in the A tier. I think because you have to do this during the storm, and I think there's just better cornerstones out there. I'm not sure if this is an A tier cornerstone. It's still not bad, but I am technically bumping it down to B tier by a couple spaces. So we don't need to look at that one. It's still mostly the same. Blightrot Pruner. Here's another new cornerstone, the third one that was introduced in the recent patch. So Blightrot Pruner, let's take a look at that here. You gain 5 eggs when a Blightrot cyst appears in your settlement. Very straightforward. And that applies for anything that generates Blightrot cysts. It gives you eggs. And 5 eggs per Blightrot cyst, that's not bad. I mean, gain 50 eggs on year 3 as soon as you get your 10 Blightrot. That's not bad. And you will be generating Blightrots. Like, anything that gives you food is generally good. And getting free food for Blightrot cysts, this is going at the top of the B tier. I think this is a very well-balanced cornerstone, and I like to see it. Of the 3 that they introduced, I think this is by far the best one in terms of balance and its viability. So Blightrot Pruner, definitely give this one a consideration. If you're playing on lower difficulty, like if you're playing on less than prestige difficulty, or especially less than P12 or P11, then this isn't going to be as good for you. You can consider giving it a pass. But if you're playing on higher difficulty and you're generating a lot of Blightrot cysts, then yeah, Blightrot Pruner is going to be fine. Okay, that does it for our B tier. Let's move on to the A tier. We have a few more things to go through for legendary cornerstones. At the bottom of the A tier, we have Hunter Gatherers. This is another small change. Take a look here. All camp production is increased by 100%, but all buildings that use fertile soil are decreased by 50%. This is just very strong. I think doubling the amount of goods you get from camps is situationally quite good. You want to be careful with this. I'm putting it at the very bottom of the A tier because if you're farming, then obviously you're not going to take this, so it is situational, but it's quite strong. Getting double from camp production means you're gathering things at double the rate, and what's on the map is double size now. Like that stack of 20 is now technically a stack of 40, right? So Hunter Gatherers really pops. This is a very small move from B to A, but Hunter Gatherers is good enough that I think it justifies it. Moving up on the A tier, we've got Deserted Caravans. Deserted Caravans. So this one was completely changed, and it was changed a while ago. But when I originally rated it, it was in the D tier. It used to completely shut down traders. Like, traders would just not show up at all, and I think trader outs as well. But yeah, global production speed is 33% faster, but traders will arrive 50% slower. 33% global production speed is a very statty. Love to see it. Traders arrive slower is annoying, but you still have the option to summon traders when you need to. So I do like this one. I think it was a good change. 33% production speed. It's hard to overstate just how good that is. And you can still do trade routes, no problem, and you can still summon traders. So I think Deserted Caravans, A tier for sure. And moving up, we have Protected Trade. So this one did get nerfed. The forest recedes, yeah. Hostility is reduced by 15 points every time you sell goods worth 30 amber. However, complex food needs grant 1 less resolve point. So this got nerfed in a couple ways, and they've been changing this one a few times now, and this is what they settled on. So complex food needs grant 1 less resolve point. Like, that's devastating for lizards who have 4 different complex food needs. For something like beavers or humans, it's less of a problem, or harpies for that matter. I think, yeah, it's mostly lizards that really suffer from this. And it is a bad effect. Gaining 1 less resolve for complex food being met is pretty punishing. Like, that could be a decent amount. That could be like 2 or 3 resolve points on some of your species by the end of the game. So protected trade, this is a good benefit still. I mean, reducing hostility by 15 for every 30 amber traded. This is something we had a game recently where it was at like minus 200 or something like that. Like minus 200 hostility, which is crazy. And like definitely compensates for the bad effect on it. So protected trade, I guess it's in a decent place right now. I'm sad that they nerfed it, but I think it is relatively balanced. And I think it is still pickable. Just be careful. It's not as much of a slam dunk as it used to be. All right, that's protected trade. And moving on, we have another similar cornerstone, Prosperous Settlement, which got nerfed again multiple times. I don't know why they were coming after the trading cornerstone so heavily. Here it is. +1 global resolve every time you sell goods worth 50 amber, but scouts work 10% slower on glade events. This used to just be a 40 amber for 1 global resolve cornerstone, and then they changed it to 45, and then 50, and then they nerfed it again by making scouts work 10% slower on glade events. I think this is still a very good cornerstone. It's still something that can give you global resolve stacks. Like, you can definitely hit 3-4 global resolve stacks on this thing. Any global resolve stacks from cornerstones are going to be useful. 10% slower on glade events is unfortunate, but there are ways to mitigate that. There's other cornerstones that do give you glade event work speed. You can take this one more towards the end of the game. I would maybe on year 4 is more acceptable because you're going to open glades early on, and then maybe starting on year 4, this isn't so bad. Yeah, sad to see this one nerfed, but it's going from S to A, mostly because of the nerf that the devs implemented, I would say. So there you have it, Prosperous Settlement. Next up, we have Overexploitation. All right, so this one also got a rework. This used to be like right near the bottom of the C tier, and Overexploitation got a very big rework, and it is a lot better now. Global gathering speed is increased by 30%, which is great. Newly discovered resource nodes have more charges, 10 for small, 25 for large, which is also great, especially on Queen's Hand mode, because you're going to have naturally lower charges when you don't have your Citadel unlocked. So if you're playing on higher difficulty Queen's Hand, the +10 to small deposits is actually quite good, and the 30% gathering speed is good as well. And the downside, every depleted resource node spawns a Blight Rot Cyst. The way around this, obviously, is just don't gather all the resource nodes. You have to micro it a little bit, but if you have a bunch of small resource nodes, you can just not gather the final bit and avoid the Blight Rot Cyst. And so you're effectively then getting like +9 charges to your small deposits, right? Which is still good. Like, and of course, maybe you still need to delete a node to make space for a building. Hopefully not. Like, maybe manage your building space a little bit because you don't want to be spawning all those Blight Rot Cysts. But Overexploitation, this is actually quite powerful. It's giving 2 good effects and 1 moderately penalizing negative effect, but one that can be worked around. So Overexploitation, going in the A tier, very solid after the rework. And then we've got some usual suspects here: improvised tools, stormwalker tax, survivor bonding, workers rations, old fedora hat, one of my personal favorites, and then exploration expedition. So this one hasn't changed too much in terms of its rating, but it has changed in how it works. So let's take a look at it. You took some of the best explorers from the Smoldering City with you. Global resolve is boosted by +5 for 3 minutes every time a new glade is discovered, but woodcutting is 33% slower until you open at least 2 glades. The negative effect doesn't matter too much here, because if you're taking exploration expedition, very likely you're just going to open 2 glades right away. And even if you get this on year 2, you can just open 2 small glades and be safe with it. It's kind of okay. Getting this benefit of +5 resolve for opening a glade is really, really good. Remember, this used to give you a -5 resolve, and then when you opened a glade, it would give you +15, so a net +10. And that was the effect. And I liked that one a bit more. This one does stack vertically, so if you open multiple glades at once, you'll just get all that boost right at once, which is, I think, good. This is a bit more safe because it doesn't give you the -5 penalty, so you don't have to worry about during the storm about getting crushed by resolve during the storm and having to open glades. But I like the old version a little bit better. This is still good. It's still a solid cornerstone. It's just different. And you can take this one pretty much whenever. You should open 2 glades right away to get rid of the penalty, though, because woodcutting speed decreased is not a good thing. So that's Exploration Expedition. It has been changed, but its rating is basically the same. So there you have it, Exploration Expedition. Family Gratitude, of course, still good, but Family Gratitude is no longer at the very top of the A tier. Up here we have Alarm Bells. Crazy. What is Alarm Bells doing on the top of the A tier? Well, this thing got reworked quite a bit. All workers have a 5% higher chance of producing double yields for every 110 points of expected corruption per minute in the Ancient Hearth. Wow, so what does that mean? Well, every Blightrot cyst that you get is 90 points of expected corruption, at least on high prestige difficulty. And I will caveat this by saying if you're playing on low difficulty before the Blightrot is amplified, Alarm Bells is going to be kind of bad, so don't take it in that case. But if you're playing on higher difficulty, like past P11, P12, Alarm Bells is going to be great. Every Blightrot cyst is going to give you 90 points of expected corruption in that case, which means if you have 5 Blightrot cysts, you're going to get a 20% doubling chance. If you have 10, like if it's year 3 and year 3 rolls around, for all of clearance and a lot of the storm, you're going to have 40% doubling chance. I think this is quite good. So if you have just one Blightrot cyst, it's not giving you anything, but it's not that difficult to stack Blightrot cysts, and the game will do that to you naturally on years 3, 6. I think with the changes, Alarm Bells, we had a crazy game with Alarm Bells, getting a lot of doubling chance out of this thing. And of course, this also works with Hidden from the Queen combo, where you get Hidden from the Queen and the other Cornerstone, and you just let your Blightrots go, and you never do anything about it. That's like the dream, is if you could get those 3 Cornerstones and just let the Blightrots go and never ever fight them. But yeah, Alarm Bells really, really good since the rework. I advise it. If you're playing on low difficulty, don't take it, but if you're playing above P12, yes, do take it. So that's Alarm Bells. It used to be way down here. All right, let's move on to the S tier. We got some really good things here to talk about. At the very bottom of the S tier, we got Burnt to a Crisp. And remember, this used to be an epic Cornerstone, and it's unchanged, except that it was taken to legendary status. And we have here gain 20 coal for every 3 burned Blightrot cysts, which is really good. And burning 3 Blightrot cysts takes 9 coal, so like this is like an infinite amount of coal production if you can just keep making Blightrot cysts and burning them. So Burnt to a Crisp, really, really good. Even as a legendary Cornerstone, it still stacks up to where approximately it was on the epic list, in my opinion. And yeah, draft this one often. It's very good. It'll solve your fuel problems. It makes generating Blightrot cysts a lot less risky. Burnt to a Crisp. Next up, we have Generous Rations. Now, Generous Rations used to be, I believe, in the A tier, right? And we're bumping it up to the S tier. And part of the reason for that is because we've learned that we can starve people. And I haven't talked about that too much, but that's one of the biggest things that we do differently now compared to a year ago, is you use consumption control to intentionally starve villagers. And certain species like humans and beavers can handle hunger stacks reasonably well. Generous Rations, what this does is it increases the amount of food consumed during a break by 50%. So if you're playing on prestige difficulty, like P20, starting on P7, right? Starting on P7 is when this happens. Is you get this as a penalty already on prestige difficulty, 50% extra food consumption. So if you have both, if you have Generous Rations and you're playing on P20, what that means is your villagers are going to have 100% increased food consumption, and they will always consume 2 food every time they go on break. And that applies. So if you have lizards, for instance, and lizards are eating 4 different food items, pie, pickles, jerky, and skewers, if they're eating all 4 of those, they will eat 8 food items. That's what they will eat. So Generous Rations, like this penalty applies a little bit less, like it's not exactly a 50% on prestige difficulty. But getting 5 Global Resolve is crazy. And getting 5 Global Resolve means you can actively starve your workers. And remember, if you starve your workers, it's as if they didn't eat anything. So the extra 50% consumption rate doesn't really matter if you're able to starve your workers aggressively. And this enables you to starve your workers more aggressively. So Generous Rations was always good. Anything giving you 5 Global Resolve stacks is crazy. Generous Rations, because it enables you to starve your villagers more aggressively, it actually makes the penalty not as bad as it seems. So this is good. Generous Rations going in the S tier. I love to see this thing. I would take it even on year 2, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, even on year 2, it's totally fine. Remember, starve people using the consumption control panel. If you're a newer player, don't worry too much about that. Like, you'll figure it out eventually. But even then, like getting +5 Global Resolve as a newer player at the cost of consuming extra food, I think is totally worth just picking this thing. And finally, what's the one Cornerstone we haven't discussed yet? What's the one Cornerstone we haven't discussed yet? And this one honestly hasn't moved positions very much. It's still very similar to where it was before. But I think it deserves a special call out. And there it is. No quality control. This thing is, in my, like, I don't have an S plus tier list. Everything is just in the S tier. But if I did have an S plus tier list, I think it would be no quality control and Rebellious Spirit standing alone at the very top. I think Rebellious Spirit is still better, but no quality control, this thing is so insanely good. We always knew it was good, but it really has stood up to the test of time. Whenever I see no quality control, it's just one of those moments like, yes, like the game is turning around, right? Like we finally got it. We got the no quality control. This thing is good for 2 reasons. Triple wood production, which solves your fuel problem, and 50 insects per year, which is potentially going to solve your food problem. No quality control is absolutely statty. This thing is busted. I hope they don't remove it. I really honestly, I hope they don't remove it. I know I'm like raving about it right now, and I'm worried it's going to get the cheap construction treatment. But this thing, and of course the downside on this, all wood is removed at the end of each year. It doesn't matter. There's ways where you can store your wood. You can put it inside of buildings. Like you can just make a whole bunch of crude workstations and just store wood inside of those if you really want to conserve your wood supply. No, you need wood. It's one of the most important resources. You need food. That's another very important resource. So no quality control does everything. And this thing is something you should be picking frequently. I think the only cornerstone that even stands up to this is Rebellious Spirit, which is better. But no quality control is so good, you're going to draft this. I mean, you could arguably take it over Rebellious Spirit in some cases. That's how good it is. So I think Rebellious Spirit and no quality control deserve the S+ rating, kind of standalone here. And I would say Smuggler's Visit is still borderline, very good, and Smuggler's Visit stands up even better on Queen's Hand mode, I would say. But no quality control, very, very good. Getting a slight boost. I'm glad to promote that one. It has absolutely stood the test of time. You should be drafting no quality control pretty much always. And that's it. This is all of our legendary cornerstones. Take a look. I think most of these aren't too surprising. Like Hidden from the Queen was a very big mover because it got nerfed, and I just can't justify that one anymore. So these new ones, Mark of the Sealed ones from the Shadows, also not very good. You shouldn't be drafting those really if you can avoid it. And that's kind of it. Let's move on to the buildings. Before we officially get into the building changes themselves, let's once again revisit this building rubric. And I think this is still good criteria. I was reading this again, and I actually like having this criteria the second time around because it's really, I had a hard time rating the buildings compared to the cornerstones in particular. I think most of the cornerstones I would think, oh yeah, this is A tier, or oh, this is C tier, and feel generally confident about the placement. Buildings, I think, are a bit more complicated. There's more that go into them. They're a little bit more species dependent overall, the benefits they provide, the resources you have to spend to make them. It just feels like buildings, there's a lot more consideration that goes into it, and I had a harder time adjusting my ratings of buildings compared to cornerstones. So I did want to revisit this, and let's take a quick look. S tier, best of the best. Performs a task with unparalleled efficiency or provides 3 solid recipes, always draftable at any stage, very likely to be best in slot building for a certain recipe. And what I mean by that, and that is kind of a World of Warcraft term, excuse me, is it's going to be, if you want to make pie, for instance, then what is the best pie building you can have? And my answer to that is the furnace is the best pie building you can have. Technically, there is a better pie recipe on the brick oven, but most of the time, the furnace is just a very solid building. You want it for the bricks. The fact that it does pie is great. I would rate the furnace as a much better, I would rate it as the best building for pie. And I think that's part of why the furnace falls into S tier category. I mean, S tier also because it provides 3 solid recipes. It's usually always draftable. I think the furnace is a little bit suspect when it comes to always being draftable, but it is the best of the best, I think. A tier, it is very strong. It provides 2 excellent recipes or 3 good ones. It is frequently draftable at any point in the game, but may be better at certain stages. And I said frequently, not almost always, right? It may face competition from S tier buildings or other buildings. B tier, average strength, provides at least 1 excellent recipe or 2 good ones, often draftable, but somewhat influenced by current biomes. It constitutes bread and butter of the building pool. C tier, subpar strength, it provides 1 good recipe or 3 mediocre ones. It is draftable in the late game or in certain biome species setups. It may fill niches based on your previous drafts, and I have a little bit of a surprise, so keep this in mind a little bit. I have a little bit of a change to the tier list for this, and that may be a temporary change. It may be a temporary change. D tier. It is extremely weak. It offers only weak recipes. It is extremely dependent on current setup. Other buildings simply outcompete this one, or this one provides a relatively useless function. I did make some changes because I think there's only one true D tier building. So let's get into the buildings tier list. And here you have it. What is that giant red D doing in the middle of this tier list? Check it out. I split the C tier into 2 different clusters, the C plus and the C. And I know this is like a fairly substantial change to how I originally have the tier lists. And this could only be temporary, but I really wanted to separate out. I felt the C tier was getting a little bit cluttered. I felt like there was a lot of buildings in the D tier which no longer belonged there because they were proving that they are useful in certain situations. There's really only one building that belongs truly in the D tier, I think. And the rest of the stuff either stands out as kind of borderline B tier, which is what I have as the C plus tier, which is stuff that's generally good, just very situational. And then the low tier C, which is situational stuff, which is very mediocre. And we'll see what falls on either side of the C plus and the C. If you've already figured out what building is in the D tier, good job. I think a lot of you have figured that one out already. It is, of course, the clay pit. This is the worst building in the game. That really hasn't changed, and I think it's uniquely bad. I think the clay pit is a uniquely bad building compared to everything in the game, and I believe at some point somebody jokingly suggested putting the clay pit as its own tier because of how bad it is. I originally thought that suggestion was kind of funny, but then the more I thought about it, I thought, you know, it's just kind of true. The clay pit needs a rework. It needs something. When you pick this building, it unlocks a cornerstone for you, which is steel matox, which is a D tier cornerstone. Clay pit is so bad, it's absolutely undraftable. Just don't pick this thing. You're never going to get value out of it. You really should not get value out of the clay pit ever. And yellow water is not what you want to be synergizing with. You want to synergize with green water. You want the greenhouse. This thing is atrocious. Don't ever draft it. Let's work our way up the C tier. I'm not even going to show the clay pit in the game because I don't even want to do it justice. We're just going to distance ourselves as far away from the clay pit as possible. C tier. Okay, provisioner. And I probably don't need to show too many. There were some building changes. Provisioner is not one of them. Just warming you up to the fact that there were some building changes since we did our last video. Provisioner does 2-star flour, 2-star barrels, 2-star provisions. The more I've played, the less I care for the 2-star provision recipe. I think I barely ever use this thing. I make provisions usually earlier on if I end up with one of these buildings. The provisioner, by the way, takes 12 planks, 6 fabric to put down on prestige difficulty. Very expensive, only a 2-slot building. 2-star flour recipe, they're simply better. Like, you want the rain mill, you want the supplier. The 2-star flour recipe here, it just suffers from a lot of competition. Barrel recipe, not that great. Pack of provisions, also not that great. The provisioner was never a good building, but I think I had it higher up on the C tier before, and it is one of the worst buildings in the game, especially if you factor out the clay pit. I think the provisioner, these recipe offerings are very weak. This is a very inefficient building to put down. It's situational and offers very weak recipes. So provisioner, I think this one does belong in the C tier. I think it is better than the manufactory and tinctuary potentially, but very low in the C tier. Moving up, we have the Cellar. The Cellar, congrats to the Cellar, actually moving above the Provisioner in ratings here. Queen's Hand mode is definitely part of the reason why the Cellar got moved up in viability. Because if you're playing on Queen's Hand mode, you don't have the Field Kitchen. And if you don't have the Field Kitchen, pickled goods and jerky recipe is actually useful. Like, these recipes are still not so great. They're not very efficient compared to things you'll find on the granary or the smokehouse, of course, but these are okay. And the 3-star wine recipe is somewhat unique. This is the best wine recipe, of course. Sometimes you want to make wine. Not usually, but sometimes. Cellar, I think this does not deserve to be a D tier building. I believe the Cellar deserves to be low C. It's situational, and it provides relatively weak recipes, but it does have the best wine recipe. So, Cellar, it's going to C tier from D. Let's move up. We have the Advanced Rain Collector. Yeah, congrats to the Advanced Rain Collector, or the ARC as I like to sometimes call it. This thing has shown that it is situationally useful. If you get the right cornerstones, if you get the right orders, the Advanced Rain Collector is situationally good. All my criticisms of it still stand, which is that it's very pricey to put down with 8 planks, 5 parts, and pipes on prestige difficulty. It's just very expensive to put this thing down. You oftentimes can't afford the pipes or the parts or the planks. Like, there's just very limiting here. But it is a nice building. If you can afford to put this thing down, it does have some situational benefits. It's not a D tier building. It is a C tier building. I would avoid drafting this usually, but there are situations where it will actually help you. So Advanced Rain Collector is going up from D to C, and above the Cellar. I think it is better than the Cellar a little bit. Above Advanced Rain Collector, we have the Artisan, and I wanted to specifically call out the Artisan because it did get changed recently. Or not too recently, a little while ago at this point. But let's take a look at it. The only difference between now and a year ago was the Artisan used to do pigment. Now the Artisan does Pack of Luxuries instead of pigment, and it still has the same 2-star coat, 2-star barrel. This is a situational building, and it provides reasonable benefits. It's not terrible. Sometimes you want the Pack of Luxuries, sometimes you want the coats, but these are weak recipes overall. The Pack of Luxuries is actually the best recipe on here, and it takes 12 planks, 6 fabric to put this down. The only good thing I can say about this is the 3-seater with Harpy benefit. Artisan is slightly better since it has the Pack of Luxury good recipe now. And Bathhouse is going to be at the top of the C tier. Rounding out the C tier is the Temple, and we should take a look at the Temple because it did change since the last video. Let's take a look at the Temple. It still consumes religion and education, but now what it does is the passive effect for every 200 seconds spent sacrificing goods, 25 hostility reduction. This thing isn't as good as the monastery. You would have to sacrifice for 800 seconds to have it be as good as the monastery, and that's not easy to do. Again, this is one of those assemble Exodia type situations where if you get the flour and you get the good oil recipe, and then you start sacrificing the oil at the temple, you can produced quite a bit of hostility reduction. This is actually twice as good as it used to be. When they first made this change, it was 300 seconds to gain 20 hostility reduction, and at 225 it's actually twice as good as what it was originally introduced as. That makes the temple decent, and also the fact that this thing does 2 luxury consumptions. Like, even if this was a complete blank and this just did incense and scrolls, that would make it kind of a C tier building. So temple, it's not D tier, it's better than that. It does have some potential to scale some hostility reduction now, but more often than not, you're just going to draft this so you can consume incense or consume scrolls, and that's why the temple is only okay, but it's better than D tier. All right. And that rounds out our C tier: Bathhouse, Temple, Artisan, Advanced Rain Collector, Cellar, Provisioner, Manufactory, Tinctury, Clay Pit all the way at the bottom, of course. Let's go to C+, and we're going to work our way up from the bottom. And you can see Market did make the cutoff here. I think Market is actually a C+ building. I like it more than the Bathhouse and the Temple. The Market, while the effect on it I think is usually not great, on Queen's Hand mode it's okay, and if you don't have Harpies, the effect is actually good. That is one of the nice things about the Market, is if you don't have Harpies, well, Harpies consume tea, so they want the Market. But if you don't have Harpies, then you don't have their firekeeping benefit, so the Market actually provides kind of an additional benefit to you. It's sort of like insurance. Like, you don't have the Harpies to drink tea at the Market, but you get the plus 10 carry capacity at the Market, which you desperately need because you don't have Harpies. So the Market is a generally useful building. I do mark it as C+ now. I think it does stand out there. The Bakery, by the way, this thing is not so good. I originally had Bakery as B tier, and after further consideration, I think it just deserves to be C+. It's really not powerful enough. The recipes it offers are situational, and they're kind of weak. I do put it a little bit more on the C+ side, but there's simply better lizard buildings out there. There is better pie buildings. Biscuits are not a very good recipe. It's easy to get supply locked at the Bakery, so Bakery is a C+ building. Draft it with caution. Additionally, in the C+, we got the Smelter, Brick Oven, Druid's Hut, Cooperage, Scribe. Scribe also fell from the B tier. It was kind of down here before, but I think the Scribe definitely fits more of a C+ building. It's not bad. There are situations where it is situationally good, but it's never an amazing building. And let's take a look at the Cooperage, since that was one of the buildings that changed. And I think I can call out a few buildings here at the same time, because some of these buildings did a swap. So the Cooperage does coats now, and this used to be on the Smithy. The Smithy used to do 2-star coats, and now that 2-star coat recipe is on the Cooperage, and the Cooperage used to do training gear. That training gear recipe is on the Smelter. So Smelter. So the Smelter has training gear now. It used to have pipes, and the pipes recipe got bounced to the Smithy. So they kind of did a 3-way swap with these buildings, which I'm not totally sure why that was the case, that the devs decided that was a good thing. But let me give my opinion on the Smithy since I'm talking about these right now. I think it's actually worse. This thing now consumes copper bars for 2 of its recipes. What I liked about having coats on the Smithy was it really had a diverse recipe offering that was good. Like, 2-star tools is a good recipe. 2-star trade goods is a good recipe. 2-star coats is a mediocre recipe, but it takes different inputs than these 2 things. And sometimes you just want to make coats. The Smithy, I think with the coat recipe, used to be a lot better. I think the pipe recipe feels a bit weaker. This thing is going to get supply locked on copper bar, crystal dew very often now. So the Smithy is getting demoted a little bit. I think I have the Cooperage at about the same place it used to be. I don't think this thing is fundamentally different. It does coats now instead of the training gear, which is, I guess it is better. I guess that does make the Cooperage a little bit better, but I'm not a big fan of the 1-star tea recipe, and these recipes overall are still quite weak. 3-star barrels is the most interesting recipe on here. So Cooperage still a C+ building, even with the change. And Smelter, let's go back to the Smelter. The Smelter does the 3-star copper bars. Let's actually look at the real Smelter. 3-star copper bar, 2-star training gear, 1-star biscuits. So this thing used to do pipes. The training gear recipe, it's okay. My problem with training gear is if you're using copper bars, this is kind of expensive. The good thing I can say about this is it completes its own supply line. What I have a hard time forgiving the Smelter for is the fact that it does 1-star biscuits. And biscuits is, I mean, that's not really better than the Field Kitchen, first of all. The biscuits recipes in general are kind of bad. They're very low value. They're very dependent on having the rain mill to be viable, I think. Typically, you're not going to be making biscuits. The 1-star biscuit recipe is bad. The 3-star copper bar recipe is just kind of situational. It's good, but very situational. You need to have the copper ore to make this happen. And even if you have the copper bars here, turning them into training gear is not always going to happen. Usually copper bars are something you want to spend on tools, so I don't value the training gear recipe as much. It's still okay. And if you find stone and reeds to turn into training gear, that is quite good. Like, this is actually a good recipe. This, by comparison, is a bad recipe. See what I'm saying? So yeah, that's training gear for you. And the Smelter is still, I think, a C+ building. It's very situational. Training gear is situational. Biscuits are bad. Copper bars are situational. Let's go back to the tier list here. So yeah, we've got Scribe, Cooperage, Druid's Hut, Brick Oven, C+ building, Smelter, and the Smithy. We'll get to the Smithy in a moment. Additionally, on the C+, we have T-Doctor. Okay, this is one I need to basically apologize for because I was wrong about the T-Doctor. I originally rated this as an A tier building, but I think it's clearly not. After experiencing it in real time, it's simply too slow. It does not stack fast enough. They should probably change this back to gaining 1 stack every 150 complex food consumed. And let's take a look at the T-Doctor. The T-Doctor gives you 1 global resolve stack every time you consume 200 complex food. Let me say it's not technically consume 200 complex food. If you have 200 pickled goods and you eat all of them, you're not going to get 1 stack on the T-Doctor, because if you're playing on prestige, I guess it depends if you're playing on prestige difficulty. If you're playing on prestige difficulty, your villagers are going to consume potentially double pickled goods. And when that happens, it doesn't count as 2 stacks. It only counts as 1 stack. So 200 pickled goods is only going to get you like, I don't know, 130 stacks or something like that, which is not a full stack. And this is better if you're not playing on prestige difficulty. If you're playing on above prestige 7 difficulty, T-Doctor becomes a lot less good. And I think training gear is kind of a strange resource a lot of the time. There isn't any amazing training gear recipe out there. Training gear is not usually what I'm looking to do. T is more likely. So this is good for T. Yeah, it's just that this building stacks way too slow for the passive effect to be good. And frankly, the Tavern is a really good building. The T-Doctor is barely ever going to surpass the Tavern if you're playing on prestige anyways. And if you get to that point, you maybe should have won the game by then if you've consumed so much complex food. So T-Doctor, I think this one needs a buff. I think it needs to go back down to 150 per stack, which is what it was originally. Coming in at the top of the C+ tier, we have the Alchemist Hut. I don't really want to show this one. I think it's reasonably self-explanatory. This one was always kind of a low B building in my mind. I guess I had it rated higher. It does have very weak recipe offerings, is the main gripe I have with the Alchemist Hut. 2-star Crystal Dew is fairly easy to get somewhere else, like the Forester's Hut. Here it is. Here's the Alchemist Hut. Yeah, Crystal Dew recipe. Wine is something, like, technically the Cellar has a much better wine recipe. If you really want to do wine, like, the Cellar isn't a bad option. Distillery is an okay building. I prefer it over the Alchemist Hut, I would say. 2-star tea recipe, simply outclassed by the tea house. Better ways to do this. I think the Alchemist Hut, like, while I like this, while it's offering a lot of specialization bonuses, it is expensive to put this thing down, and the recipes are all kind of weak. So Alchemist Hut's going to C+. Let's go to the B tier. We've seen our C tier. We've seen how it's divided now, how we have these good buildings, which are kind of C+, and these weaker ones, which are still viable, but offer weaker recipes. And, okay, B. The Distillery. This one I originally had rated as a C tier, and I think the Distillery is good enough to bump it to the B tier. I actually really like the 2-star porridge recipe. Yeah, 2-star wine, 2-star porridge, 2-star barrels. The good thing about this is it kind of feeds into its own supply line a little bit, and the porridge is 2-star porridge is generally a pretty good recipe. It's like kind of resource diverse here what this thing does. So I like the Distillery. I think the cost to put this down is like 333, which is overall not terrible. Like reasonably low cost to put this building down. And 2 decent specialization bonuses. So Distillery, it's going to go up to the B tier from C. A minor movement, but I think one that's important to call out nonetheless. Tinkerer. So I'm only calling the Tinkerer out. It's still a B tier building. I had this near the top of the B tier before, and I think it just fell a few spaces, and I thought, like, well, it's still a B building, but it's not like a great B building. It's just okay. This thing, of course, does training gear, it does pack of building mats, and it does tools. All those things are decent recipes. There's better ways to get tools. The pack of building mats isn't strictly necessary. I think the Tinkerer is a little bit weaker than it once was. I'm not even going to show it. Let's move on. In the B tier, we have the Leatherworker. Okay, so this one actually changed. So we do need to talk about the Leatherworker a little bit. It used to have Pack of Luxuries as its 3rd recipe, and that got swapped with Pigment. And frankly, Pigment is a terrible recipe. It's debatably the worst recipe in the game. It just does not provide very much value. The only thing it's really used for is Pack of Trade Goods and Scrolls, and frankly, Pack of Trade Goods has a lot of options. You'd rather be putting other things into Pack of Trade Goods that you're making incidentally. I think Pigment is just a bad recipe. And 3-star Water Skins is a good recipe, but it's very, very situational. And 2-star Fabric is a good recipe, but one thing we've noticed recently is that fabric isn't quite as important of a resource as bricks and planks. While I do like the Leatherworker in theory, I think this building suffers from the fact that fabric is the worst building mat to have a better recipe for, unless it's the Weaver, because the 3-star Fabric recipe is kind of nutty, but the 2-star Fabric recipe is just okay. Water Skins is a very situational recipe. Pigment is a very bad recipe. The one good thing about the Leatherworker is it's got some good specialization bonuses, and it is very cheap and inexpensive to put this thing down, but it's not a very high value building, right? Like, it's very situational. and the 2-star fabric recipe, there's just better ways to get this. So leatherworker, I think it's B tier. I'm kind of demoting this one. It's, yeah, going to be about mid B tier. I was looking at this compared to all of the other fabric buildings and all of the other plank buildings and brick buildings, and I just don't see the leatherworker as being that great. I think there's some better options out there, like Smokehouse. Smokehouse is a good building. Nothing wrong with the Smokehouse. There's nothing wrong with the Forester set. Nothing wrong with the Kiln. Okay, maybe there's some things wrong with them, which is why they're in the B tier. But you know what I'm saying. Like, I think if you stack the leatherworker up with its pigment recipe against some of these other buildings, it's these other buildings look fine compared to the leatherworker. Yeah, let's move on. Next up, we have the grill. The grill has not changed at all, but it's got the double lizard bonus, which is really good. As far as lizard buildings go, this thing is unparalleled. If you have lizards, this thing is huge, and I think lizards need all the help they can get. But the skewers recipe turns 3 food and 3 food into 10 food. So this thing just generates food, 4 free food every minute 45 seconds, which if you're gathering food, you actually will gather food a little bit faster than that. But the thing is, this is generating food that's not from the map. You know, it's like limitless as long as you have the resources. It's not like you're getting it from the map and like you're going to run out of food. So this opens up more food for you. It's complex food. You can sell skewers. There's a lot of reasons to want this 3-star skewers recipe, even if you don't have foxes or lizards. And I think it's good enough that you want to have it. And that's why I think the grill belongs in B tier. And frankly, this 1-star ale recipe, 1-star copper bars are useful. These are useful. Like, they're kind of bad recipes, but they are situationally. Sometimes you just need ale to win the game. Sometimes copper bars, you need this to make tools. You'll just have a ton of copper ore, and it's okay that your copper bar recipe is a little bit less efficient. It just doesn't matter. Yeah, I think the grill offers enough things where it's a B tier building. Rating it as C before was not doing it justice. Coming in right behind the smokehouse. And then finally, we have the smithy, getting demoted from A to B. We looked at this one earlier, so we don't have to see it again, but for the honest assessment I have is that this, having the coat swapped out with pipes, makes the smithy easier to supply lock. Its overall recipe options are simply less good as a result of that switch. So smithy's going down to B tier. Let's go with the A tier. We have apothecary at the very bottom. I think this used to be a bit higher up. I am a bit suspicious of the apothecary. I think it is still an A tier building. It does have the best biscuit recipe in the game, but biscuits aren't that great. It does have the 2-star incense, which is the best incense recipe, and that is occasionally useful, incense and tea. So apothecary is fine, but it's not the best building because of the biscuit recipe is kind of holding it back, I would say. Plantation was originally rated as B. I think this is fairly self-explanatory. The plantation, when you don't have the field kitchen, the small farm and the herb garden aren't going to produce food for you, and you probably do not have the field kitchen if you're playing on Queen's Hand, early on at least. So the plantation, the raw food it produces, it scales well with the ranch. The plantation, I think it is an A tier building. I still prefer the small farm and the herb garden. I think they're a bit more general purpose, but the plantation producing raw food is quite good. Above the plantation, in the A tier, we have the tool shop. And this one's been a promotion. I think the tool shop, this is a strong building because of the 3-star tool recipe. That's basically the same as it always was. But the 3-star tool recipe really is that powerful. Tools are an excellent resource, and the 3-star tool recipe is a lot better than the 2-star tool recipe. So this building is very unique in the fact that it allows you to win the game by opening caches. And it has allowed us to win the game by opening caches in a number of instances. So the tool shop, I think, has stood the test of time. The 3-star tool recipe is extremely good, especially on things like the Scarlet Orchard. And next up in the A tier, we have the Tavern. The Tavern, it just has 3 global resolve stacks. Like, it's kind of an unassuming building, just 3 global resolve stacks. We have competition from Explorer's Lodge, from the Guild House, from the Tea Doctor, but none of those things really stack up. I think the Tavern is just the most consistent. It's the most reliable. If you look at Explorer's Lodge, like, yeah, Explorer's Lodge can get to 5 or 6 stacks, and when it does, it's excellent. Same story with the Guild House. Tea Doctor, really not so much. The Tavern, though, this is just always good. It's not conditional on anything. And wine is a good resource to consume. Good for foxes. Pretty good for beavers, too. Ale, it's okay. Like, this is just a very solid building. It helps your humans out. 3 global resolve stacks, hard to beat it. So, Tavern, we did not do this one justice before by putting it in the B tier. It definitely belongs in the A tier. Near the top of the A tier, wow, what are we missing still, guys? Only 4 buildings left. And these are some good ones. So which ones haven't we discussed yet? Yeah, let's discuss this one. This is the Beanery. The Beanery got nerfed a couple times. This one was originally in the S tier, and I think if it were still in its original state, it would absolutely be in the S tier, but it got nerfed a couple times. So we do need to take a look at this. It still has the 3-star porridge recipe. It's only got 1-star pickled goods now. It used to have the 2-star pickled goods recipe and no longer, which, yeah, very unfortunate, very unfortunate. The 2-star pickled goods recipe is very strong. Having 2-star pickled goods and 3-star porridge made this thing an absolute powerhouse. And the 4 workers as well got nerfed down to 3. So it doesn't house as many people or, as many workers. The crystallized dew recipe, still not very good. So Beanery is going down to the A tier. Hate to see it, but it does not belong in the S tier anymore ever since the nerfs. And at the very top of the A tier, maybe you figured this one out. This was a diamond in the rough before, I think, and it's I think it has proven itself. I am very happy whenever I see this building, and it is, of course, the ranch. It is the ranch. Yeah, so this thing produces meat, eggs, and leather. And I think this is a great intermediate building. Like, this unlocks water skins for you. It can enable you to make even more fabric. It's just like there's so many things you can do at the ranch with kind of these alternate resources and plant fiber and grain and reeds, which oftentimes you're going to have a lot of. Like on the Royal Woodlands, you're going to have a lot of plant fiber, most likely. On the Coral Forest, you're going to have reeds. Grain, if you have the small farm, you're going to have a ton of grain. Like, there's just a lot of things you can do at the ranch. And this is only producing raw food, but honestly, raw food is good. We frequently run out of food, or we're frequently trying to stretch our food supply out as much as possible. And anything that can generate food from non-food items or generate more food from food items is good. Like, this isn't much faster than gathering food, but this doesn't run out. Like, this isn't something we can stop doing unless we run out of berries, of course. But it's not like gathering from the map where you're going to run out of that option eventually. This is just generating free food. And when you're playing on higher difficulties, you are going to run out of food. It's going to be a huge concern, especially on Queen's Hand mode. Yeah, the ranch just kind of helps you with that a lot. Frequently, you need meat to do jerky, to do skewers. Like, you may need this specifically. Eggs aren't the best resource, but meat is a good resource if you can't access it otherwise. I think the ranch is just good. It's just a good building. The marsh is still the least good biome for the ranch. So if you're playing on the marsh, still consider giving the ranch a pass. But otherwise, this thing is really good. I always love to see it. All right, and that does it for our A tier. Moving on to the S tier. And I think, obviously, at the very top here. But before that, the granary. The granary, I had this in the A tier, but I think the granary, even though it hasn't changed, deserves to be in the S tier because with the beanery nerf, I think the granary is probably the best pickled goods building. In fact, it is the best pickled goods building, and pickled goods is an excellent recipe. Pickled goods, fabric, 3 worker slots, and 2-star pack of crops. Just a very solid overall building. Granary, I think, belongs in the S tier ever since the beanery got nerfed. No surprises there. And this one also is a non-mover, but it is at the top of the tier list now, so I wanted to give it a shout out. And that is the lumber mill. And why is the lumber mill so darn good? Well, we know it produces planks, and planks are the most important resource in the game, which is becoming apparent. So anything that does 3-star planks, which is the lumber mill, is going to be an outstanding building because this is the most important resource in the game, is planks. Conserves your wood supply for fuel, and planks are used for pretty much every single building, especially service buildings. There's just a never-ending reason to want planks. Glade events. Yeah, we're frequently buying planks. And even with 2-star recipes, we'll buy plank. The other thing about the lumber mill that's really outstanding is this only takes 3 bricks, 3 fabric to make on prestige difficulty. And like, that's something you could actually drop down right away if you're playing on regular mode and not Queen's Hand mode. On Queen's Hand mode, you may not have these resources to start with, but still, this is very cheap to put down overall. The pack of trade goods recipe is great. The 3-star planks recipe is great. This thing is just a big powerhouse right from the beginning of the game, and it's almost always a good draft. Like, even if you need the 3-star plank recipe at all, like, this thing is going to be good always. So lumber mill, I am putting this in as the best building in the game. I think you could still make an argument for the carpenter. Obviously, it's hard to pick exactly one building that is the best of the best. It's hard to say that, oh yeah, this thing is always better, because on the Coral Forest, for instance, carpenter probably is better, because you get incense on the Coral Forest to turn into pack of luxuries right away. But the carpenter, lumber mill, very strong buildings. I think everything in the S tier is way up there for a reason. I think this is a fairly accurate representation of where I'm at with buildings right now, with the clay pit being a uniquely bad building. Everything else is draftable to a certain extent. Everything in the lower C tier you want to be careful with. Everything in the C plus tier is kind of borderline B and situationally good. And that is it for the tier list updates. Thank you everyone for watching. I appreciate it. Watch me on Twitch as well. And this is current up to update 1.3. There is a rumor that the devs are in alpha version of a big update, which may introduce a 6th species. And of course, when that happens, we're going to have some sessions on that, and we'll talk about what balance changes exist in such an update when we get there. Count on it. Until next time, guys.